"Are you lost, Grandpa?" The voice was sharp, laced with the kind of arrogant confidence that only youth and a freshly pressed uniform could produce. The old man did not look up. He remained seated on a simple aluminum camp stool, his back to the sprawling, state-of-the-art Marine Corps long-range firing complex. Before him, the Mojave Desert shimmered under a brutal sun, a canvas of beige and brown stretching to a hazy, distant mountain range. He held a rifle across his lap. It was a ridiculous thing. The stock, the chassis, the scope mounts, everything was coated in a defiant, almost obnoxious shade of international orange. It looked less like a weapon of precision and more like a safety cone or a child's toy. The Marine, a gunnery sergeant with the name Decker stitched over his pocket, took a step closer. His shadow fell over the old man. "Sir, this is a restricted area, an active hot range. I'm going to have to ask you to come with me." Still, the old man did not move. His hands, gnarled and spotted with age, rested calmly on the absurd orange rifle. They were steady hands, a cartographer's map of a long and difficult life. Decker's patience, a notoriously shallow reservoir, began to evaporate in the desert heat. He was in charge of range safety for the demonstration of the new XR-4000 targeting system, a billion-dollar piece of hardware that was, at that very moment, failing spectacularly. The top brass was watching from the climate-controlled observation tower. The pressure was immense. The last thing he needed was some senile civilian wandering into the impact zone. "Hello? Did you hear me?" Decker's voice hardened. "I said you need to leave." Finally, the old man tilted his head. His eyes, pale blue and startlingly clear, met the Marine's. They were eyes that had seen the curve of the earth from great heights and the bottom of the abyss from close proximity. "I heard you, son," the old man said. His voice was quiet, a dry rustle of leaves. "I'm not lost." Decker gestured impatiently at the chaotic scene behind him. Technicians in khaki coveralls scurried around a massive, matte black rifle system bolted to a concrete platform. Data screens flickered with incomprehensible telemetry. The weapon system, designed to hit a dinner plate from 3 kilometers away, couldn't seem to hit the side of a mountain. "This is a live-fire exercise for the Advanced Warfighter Program," Decker snapped, as if explaining something to a child. "You can't be here. Your presence is a security violation and a safety hazard." The old man's gaze drifted past Decker to the failing weapon system. He watched the frantic movements of the engineers, the frustrated gestures, the shaking heads. He saw the problem in less than a heartbeat. It was a simple flaw in the harmonic dampening, a miscalculation in compensating for the barrel's micro-vibrations in the thin, hot air. He knew because he had solved the same problem 30 years ago, with a slide rule and a cup of cold coffee in a tent in some forgotten war. "They're chasing the ghost," the old man murmured, more to himself than to the gunnery sergeant. "They're correcting for the last shot, not anticipating the next one." Decker scoffed, a short, ugly sound of derision. "Right. And I suppose you're a ballistics expert?" He pointed a rigid finger at the orange rifle. "What's that thing? You win it at a carnival." A few nearby Marines, younger men who orbited Decker like nervous moons, snickered. The sound was sharp and cruel in the dry air. The old man looked down at the rifle. He ran a thumb over a small, nearly invisible inscription on the receiver, just below the bolt. "For Sarah." "Something like that," he said softly. This quiet defiance was more infuriating to Decker than any outright argument would have been. He saw it as disrespect. He saw this old, frail man as a deliberate mockery of the order and precision he worshipped. "I'm not asking again, old-timer," Decker said, his voice dropping to a low, threatening growl. He stepped forward, his polished boots crunching on the gravel, and reached down, his hand hovering over the orange rifle. "Give me the toy. We'll find your nursing home and get you back for nap time." The old man's hand tightened on the stock, but his expression remained placid. "I wouldn't touch that if I were you, son." The warning was delivered with no heat, no anger. It was a simple statement of fact, like commenting on the weather. And that, more than anything, sent Decker over the edge. His hubris took over. He saw a frail, confused senior citizen. He saw a joke of a rifle. He saw an obstacle to his perfectly ordered world. Decker's fingers closed around the barrel of the orange rifle. The moment his skin made contact with the warm metal, A jolt went through the old man. It wasn't a jolt of pain, but of memory. The world of the sun-drenched Mojave Range dissolved, replaced by the biting cold of a mountain passed deep in a hostile land. The smell of cordite and ozone. The metallic tang of blood in his mouth. The rhythmic thump-thump-thump of incoming mortar fire, each explosion walking closer. He was pinned down, his spotter bleeding out beside him, the radio a useless brick of shattered plastic. He remembered the cold, the desperate, clawing cold that seeped into his bones. He remembered the promise he'd made to his daughter, Sarah, that he would come home. He'd promised her he would paint his rifle orange, her favorite color, so she could spot him from the airplane when he landed. A silly, childish promise that had become a lifeline in the darkness. He remembered lying there, his own weapon damaged, useless. He remembered salvaging parts from 3 different broken rifles, working with frozen, bleeding fingers to build a functioning weapon. He remembered having no way to calculate the impossible shot he needed to make, a shot over a mile up a sheer cliff face to take out the mortar team that was hunting them. He had closed his eyes, not with instruments, but with instinct. He had felt the wind, tasted the air, become one with the bullet's path. He had pulled the trigger. Silence had followed. He had saved his team. He had kept his promise. When he returned, they had tried to give him medals. He had refused them all. He asked only for the strange, cobbled-together rifle he had built. He took it home, and in his workshop, he meticulously perfected it, recreating the weapon that had saved him. And he had painted it orange. For Sarah. The memory lasted only a second, but it was a lifetime. The old man's eyes refocused on Gunnery Sergeant Decker. The placid calm was gone, replaced by something ancient and hard. "Let go of my rifle," he said. The words were still quiet, but they now carried the weight of thunderheads. 100 yards away, Staff Sergeant Corrigan watched the confrontation through a pair of binoculars. He was a decade older than Decker, a man who had seen enough of the world to know that things were not always as they appeared. He didn't like Decker's swagger, his textbook arrogance. But more than that, he was bothered by the old man. It was his stillness. In a place of constant, nervous energy, the old man was a rock in a river. He was utterly, unnervingly still. Corrigan had seen that stillness before, in the eyes of men who had spent too long on the razor's edge, men for whom life and death were old, familiar acquaintances. He saw Decker grab the orange rifle. He saw the shift in the old man's posture, a subtle, almost imperceptible change, but to a trained eye, it was like watching a sleeping lion's muscles tense. Corrigan's gut screamed at him. Something was profoundly wrong. He lowered his binoculars and pulled out his radio, turning his back to Decker's group to avoid being seen. He keyed the channel for range control. "Tower, this is Corrigan. I've got a situation down at Firing Point Alpha." "We see it, Staff Sergeant," a bored voice crackled back. "Gunny Decker is handling a civilian trespasser." "Stand by." "Tower, this is not a normal trespasser," Corrigan insisted, his voice low and urgent. "The gunny is escalating. You need to get someone from command down here. Now, Decker has authority on the line, Corrigan. Let him do his job." Frustration boiled in Corrigan's throat. They weren't listening. They were seeing an old man and a hot-headed NCO. He needed something more. He needed a name. "Excuse me, sir," Corrigan said, jogging over to the confrontation. He deliberately placed himself between Decker and the old man. "Gunny, maybe we should just escort the gentleman to the main gate. Let the MPs handle it." Decker turned on him, his face flushed with anger. "Are you questioning my authority, Staff Sergeant?" "No, Gunny," Corrigan said, keeping his eyes on the old man. He addressed him directly, his tone respectful. "Sir, my name is Staff Sergeant Corrigan. May I ask your name, sir?" The old man looked at Corrigan, a flicker of appreciation in his pale eyes. "Vance," he said. "Elias Vance." Corrigan committed it to memory. He also noted the strange, custom-built action of the orange rifle, the hand-tooled look of the bolt. It wasn't a toy. It was a masterpiece of lethal engineering, disguised in absurdity. "Gunny, with all due respect, I think." "I don't pay you to think, Corrigan," Decker spat. "Now back off before I write you up." Corrigan took a step back, but his mission was accomplished. He turned away and keyed his radio again, using a command override channel he wasn't technically authorized for. "Command Net, this is Staff Sergeant Corrigan, requesting immediate intervention at range 4. I have a civilian. Name is Elias Vance. He's carrying a custom rifle, orange stock. I repeat, the name is Elias Vance. The response was immediate, but not what he expected. For 5 long seconds, there was absolute, deafening silence on the other end. The kind of silence that means someone has just dropped a grenade in a crowded room. Then a new voice came on the line, a voice Corrigan recognized with a lurch of fear. It was Colonel Matheson, the base commander. His tone was not annoyed or questioning. It was pure, distilled panic. Corrigan, what is your exact location? Firing point Alpha, sir. By the XR 4000 platform. Listen to me very carefully, Staff Sergeant. Matheson's voice was tight, strained. Is General Maddox on range? Yes, sir. He's in the main observation tower. Patch me through to his aide. Now, Corrigan heard frantic clicks and electronic squawks. Then another voice, the clipped, professional tone of a senior officer's aide. Colonel Matheson, sir. Major, this is Matheson. Get the general. Tell him Elias Vance is on the firing line at range 4. Tell him he's holding Helios. Again, that pregnant, terrified silence. Sir, are you certain? The major's voice was barely a whisper. Move, Matheson roared. Corrigan lowered his radio, his heart pounding in his chest. Helios? What the hell was Helios? He looked at the orange rifle, then at the old man, Elias Vance. Who was this man? Back at the confrontation, Decker had finally lost all control. He yanked the rifle from the old man's grasp. It was surprisingly heavy, perfectly balanced. The craftsmanship was undeniable, and it infuriated him even more. You probably 3D printed this in your garage, Decker sneered, holding it up for his cronies to see. He treated it like a piece of garbage, his fingerprints smudging the carefully oiled metal. Elias Vance rose slowly from his stool. He was not tall, but he seemed to grow as he stood, his stooped shoulders straightening. The air around him grew cold. That rifle, Elias said, his voice now devoid of any warmth, put 3 rounds into a space the size of a quarter from 2,000 yards away in a 60-mile-per-hour crosswind. It did it 30 years ago. It can still do it today. It saved the lives of 12 men. One of them was your first sergeant's father. Put it down. Decker laughed. A loud, braying laugh of disbelief. Right. You and the general, best pals, I'm sure. This relic is evidence. I'm confiscating it. It was then that they heard it. A low rumble at first, growing rapidly into the sound of straining engines and tires clawing at asphalt. Every head on the firing range turned. A convoy of 3 black, command-issue SUVs was screaming down the access road, kicking up a massive plume of dust. They weren't just driving fast, they were flying, a display of controlled panic that was more terrifying than any siren. The vehicles screeched to a halt a dozen yards away, doors flying open before they had fully stopped. Marines from the security detail spilled out, forming a perimeter, their faces grim. The rear door of the lead vehicle opened. Out stepped General Marcus Maddox, commanding general of the Marine Corps Combat Development Command. He was a 4-star general, a man spoken of in hushed, reverent tones. He was a living legend, and his face was a mask of cold, unadulterated fury. He ignored Colonel Matheson, who had arrived with him. He ignored the salutes from every Marine on the range. He ignored the billion-dollar weapon system and the failed test. His eyes, like chips of granite, were locked on one thing. He strode forward with a terrifying, single-minded purpose, his boots crunching on the gravel with the finality of a judge's gavel. He walked directly towards the small group, his gaze fixed on Gunnery Sergeant Decker, who was still holding the orange rifle. Decker froze. His face went pale. He snapped a salute, his hand trembling slightly. General, sir. We had a civilian trespasser, sir. I have the situation under. Maddox didn't even glance at him. He walked right past him, as if he were a piece of furniture, and stopped directly in front of Elias Vance. The entire range went silent. The only sound was the wind and the hum of distant generators. General Maddox, a 4-star warrior god in the eyes of every Marine present, looked at the frail old man in the simple clothes. His furious expression melted away, replaced by one of profound, absolute reverence. He brought his heels together with a sharp click. His arms snapped up in the most perfect, textbook salute Decker had ever seen. It was a salute of utter, unconditional respect. "Mr. Vance," General Maddox's voice boomed across the silent range, thick with emotion. "It is an honor, sir." Elias Vance simply nodded. "Marcus, you've gotten old." A small, watery smile touched the general's lips. "You haven't changed a bit, Eli." Maddox dropped his salute and finally turned. He did not yell. He did not scream. He fixed his cold, granite gaze on Gunnery Sergeant Decker, and his voice became a quiet, lethal whisper that was more terrifying than any parade ground roar. "Gunnery Sergeant." Decker flinched as if struck. "Sir, what is your name?" "Decker, sir." "Gunnery Sergeant Decker." "Decker." Maddox repeated the name as if tasting something foul. "You are holding a piece of United States Marine Corps history. You are holding a weapon that is more important than any piece of technology on this range. You are holding a legend, and you are holding it like a piece of trash." He held out his hand. "Give it to me." Slowly, Decker, his face the color of ash, carefully handed the orange rifle to the general. Maddox took it with the reverence a priest would show a holy relic. He inspected it, his touch gentle, before turning and presenting it, two-handed, back to Elias Vance. "My apologies, Eli. The new generation lacks a sense of history." Maddox turned back to the assembled crowd of stunned Marines and technicians. He held up a hand, gesturing to Elias. "You people want to know about precision shooting?" His voice resonated with power. "You want to know about legends? You are looking at one. This is Elias Vance. To most of you, that name means nothing. But to those of us who were there, he was a myth. We called him the ghost of the Cunner Valley." A wave of shock rippled through the onlookers. The ghost was a campfire story, a boogeyman that operators whispered about, a marksman credited with impossible shots that had turned the tide of entire battles. No one knew his real name. Most thought he was just a story. 30 years ago, Maddox continued, his voice ringing with passion, we were developing the first generation of satellite-guided munitions. They were failing. A high-value target was about to escape over a mountain range, and our air support was useless. This man, then a young corporal with a background in engineering, told his commanders he could make a shot that the laws of physics said was impossible. The general pointed at the distant mountains. The target was 4,000 meters away. 4,000. Through shifting thermal layers, over a ridge, in a rising crosswind. A shot no computer today could calculate with any certainty. They laughed at him, but they were desperate, so they let him try. Maddox's gaze fell on the orange rifle now resting in Elias's hands. He didn't use a standard-issue rifle. He used that. Helios, he called it. A weapon he built himself from scrap and genius. He painted it orange not as a joke, but as a promise to his little girl back home. He painted it orange so that if he went down, the medevac pilots could find his body. It was a beacon, not of surrender, but of defiance. The general took a deep breath, his chest swelling. Mr. Vance made that shot. He didn't just hit the target. He disabled the engine block of the vehicle without harming the asset inside. A shot that saved an entire intelligence network. He refused the Medal of Honor. He refused every promotion. He asked only to go home to his daughter. He is the reason the XR program exists. His formulas, his theories on atmospheric disturbance, are the very foundation of the software you are using. He finally turned his full, quiet fury back to Decker. You, Gunnery Sergeant, in your ignorance and your arrogance, mistook a giant for a lost old man. You dismissed genius because it wasn't wrapped in a uniform that matched yours. You disrespected a man who has forgotten more about ballistics than you will ever know. You have disgraced yourself and your rank. Decker stood ramrod straight, his face a mask of utter shame, tears welling in his eyes. No excuse, sir. Maddox looked at the failing XR 4000 system, then back at Elias. Eli, they can't get it to work. The system can't account for the thermal shimmer. Elias Vance looked at the rifle in his hands, then at the distant mountains. On one of the peaks, a deactivated drone had been placed as a long-range target. It was a tiny speck, invisible to the naked eye. It was exactly 4,000 meters away. The machine is listening too hard, Elias said quietly. It's trying to find a perfect solution in an imperfect world. Sometimes, you just have to feel it. He shouldered the orange rifle. The movement was fluid, economical, a lifetime of practice distilled into a single, perfect motion. He didn't use a bipod. He didn't use a shooting mat. He just stood, a pillar of calm in the swirling dust. He settled the stock into his shoulder, his eye finding the scope. He took a breath. Let half of it out. The world fell away. There was only the reticle, the wind, and the target. He made a minute adjustment to the elevation knob, a single click that was pure instinct. Then he pulled the trigger. The rifle's report was a sharp, clean crack, not a deafening boom. For several long seconds, nothing happened. The onlookers held their breath. Then, on the massive screen in the observation tower, the camera zoomed in on the distant drone. A small, black hole appeared precisely in the center of its fuselage. A perfect shot. A collective gasp went through the crowd. It was a sound of awe, of disbelief, of sudden, profound understanding. Elias lowered the rifle and opened the bolt, the spent casing ejecting with a soft metallic tink as it hit the gravel. He turned and looked at the utterly broken gunnery Sergeant Decker. The old man's face held no triumph, no smugness, only a quiet, sad wisdom. "The weapon is just a tool, son," Elias said, his voice gentle again. "It has no honor. It has no shame. Those things belong to the man holding it." He walked over and offered his hand to the young Marine. Decker looked at the outstretched hand, then at the face of the living legend he had mocked, and he finally broke. A single tear traced a path through the dust on his cheek. He took the offered hand, his grip firm. I am sorry, sir. I was wrong." "I know," Elias said. "Now you know better. That's all that matters." General Maddox watched the exchange, then addressed his aide. "Major, you will draft a new training module for all NCOs at the Advanced Infantry School. It will focus on the unwritten history of this corps, on the legends who built it. We'll call it the Vance Protocol. Gunnery Sergeant Decker and his team will be the first to attend." Months passed. The Vance Protocol became a mandatory and deeply respected part of Marine NCO training. Gunnery Sergeant Decker completed the course at the top of his class. He was a changed man. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a quiet, steady humility that made him a far better leader. One Saturday morning, he was in a small diner in a town just outside the base. He was sitting at the counter, stirring his coffee, when the bell over the door jingled. Elias Vance walked in. He wore the same simple clothes, carried the same air of quiet stillness. He took a seat at the far end of the counter and ordered a black coffee. Decker's heart hammered in his chest. He took a deep breath, slid off his stool, and walked over. The old man looked up as he approached, his pale blue eyes recognizing him immediately. "Mr. Vance," Decker said, his voice steady. "Sir, I wanted to apologize again. Properly. There was no excuse for my behavior. I was arrogant, and I was ignorant, and I failed to live up to the standards of the uniform I wear. I am truly sorry." Elias Vance looked at the young man standing before him. He saw the genuine remorse in his eyes. He saw the hard-won humility. He saw a Marine. He gestured to the empty stool beside him. "Sit down, son. Let me buy you a cup of coffee." Decker sat. The two men, a living legend and the young man who had learned his lesson, sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the clatter of the diner filling the space between them. "You know," Elias said, looking into his cup, "respect isn't about the uniform you wear or the rank on your collar. It's about seeing the history in people's eyes. Every person you meet has fought a battle you know nothing about. Remember that, and you'll be a fine leader." Decker nodded, the simple truth of the words settling deep in his soul. "I will, sir. I promise." The old man smiled, a genuine, warm smile. He had passed the torch. The legacy was safe.